All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So just start off with a couple of housekeeping items, a couple introductions, and then we will jump right in. But my name is Chris Vermelia. I am Fishtech's Director of Identity and Access Management, and I'm excited to welcome you all along with Sean Dubey and the Semperis team as we discuss ransomware, risk, and recovery, and to begin to provide some things to consider when evaluating if your core identity system is ready for today's attacks. Disaster recovery strategies have traditionally focused on natural disasters and then expanded into other physical events such as terrorism. But we all know, especially recent events here, that cyber weaponization is really everywhere. And the extinction event is a genuine threat with no respect for geographic boundaries. Today, we're going to dive into how we can quickly recover our critical business operations following a ransomware attack, and have some good discussion on what we can do to address some of those items. Before we do begin, we just want to provide a little bit of background on both Fishtech and Semperis, as well as our featured presenter, Sean Dubey. So to start, on the Fishtech side, Fishtech is a data-driven cybersecurity services provider. We identify gaps in solutions to help our customers minimize risk, maintain compliance, and increase efficiency by really combining a group of holistic data-driven cybersecurity solutions to meet our customers' needs. As a proven innovators in the security integration space, we offer advisory and technology services to meet our customers where they're at. We provide more speed to value by customizing unique solutions that allow our customers to pivot, cut red tape, eliminate waste, really regain that focus on their core business. Our advisory first approach is designed to accelerate technology decisions and ensure they're aligned with the strategy of the business itself, any regulatory compliance requirements, looking at due diligence and increasing the operational efficiencies that we're all striving for. This approach ensures that as much as possible, we deliver that right solution the first time. The way we do this, we lead our customers to a more secure future by strategically partnering with innovative and leading vendors across the cybersecurity space. I'm very excited to co-host this webinar today with Semperis, as they are one of our strategic partners. And again, excited to share this time with them today. A little background on Semperis before we dive in, but Semperis is a pioneer of identity-driven cyber resilience for cross-cloud and hybrid environments. They provide cyber preparedness, incident response, and disaster recovery solutions for enterprise directory services, which, as we all know, really house those keys to the kingdom. Semperis' patented technology for Microsoft Active Directory protects over 40 million identities from cyber attacks, data breaches, and operational errors. I'm excited to welcome with us today Sean Dubey. Sean is Semperis' Director of Services and will be leading our discussion this afternoon. He brings over 30 years of experience in enterprise IT and hybrid identity to his role, and he's also an original architect and technical leader of Intel's Active Directory, Texas Instruments Windows NT Network, and he is a 15-time MVP alumnus. Sean has been involved with Microsoft Identity Technology since his inception, so certainly excited to have him with us today, and I'm looking forward to learning a little bit from what he can share with us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I do want to point out, if you do have questions during the presentation, please feel free to ask those in the Zoom Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring those, and then we will visit those questions at the end of our presentation today and tackle as many of them as we can. We are recording this session as well, so if you have peers that weren't able to make it, we'll make that recording available afterwards. But without any further ado, I'll get out of the way here. And Sean, looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for taking time out of what is surely your busy day to hear a little bit about some risks that are not so well known in our environment and in the world in general. And although it's being pointed out again and again and again, people focus on certain aspects, but they're not aware of other aspects that can really cause them much trouble down the road. I won't spend any time on the bio stuff. Chris already did a great intro about that, and I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I've been doing Active Directory on and off for many years of my career. And as it's evolved into cloud identity and writing about cloud identity and just paying attention to watching how identity has changed exactly and how it's become so important to everything we do nowadays. Really, the takeaway, if you have one takeaway from this little chat, it is about the fact that I think you recognize that Active Directory is at the heart of your hybrid enterprise, and that you have to protect it. Otherwise, you are vulnerable to catastrophic malware attacks. But the thing is, it may not be as well protected as you think it is. And that's what this is all about. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how Active Directory is at the heart of modern security, just by giving you 3 different propositions and how they all fit together. And individually, they'll make perfect sense to you. So the first is that identity has become central to modern security. So, I've been attending identity conferences for 15 years, something like that. And they started out as, little birds of a feather in a breakout room around some tables. And then over time, it's grown larger and larger and larger. So for example, Identiverse, which used to be Cloud Identity Summit, is now taking place in Denver in June, sort of a hybrid event, and given the state where we are right now. We'll have well over 1,000, 1,500 attendees, and that was when they were in person. And it's all about identity. Microsoft says identity is the new control plane. Gartner says identity is central to providing appropriate access. And Forrester echoes the same, saying that it's a core building block of and they even throw in buzzword bingo, a zero trust security ecosystem and infrastructure. As we have moved from on-premises trusted networks to web services that operate over untrusted networks, i.e. the internet, identity has become that deciding factor of a modern security. For the enterprise, though, the reality is that enterprises have not moved wholesale to be automatically in the cloud. We have a vast amount of technical infrastructure on premises because we've been around for a long time and it's just not going anywhere. It's paid for, it does the job, the whole organization is set up around it. And that includes identity systems. Most organizations' identity systems are on premises. They may, have HR systems that are now cloud-based, but typically they feed back into on-premises identity systems that then provision users and then handle all of the daily heavy lifting that an identity management system does. Now, at the same time, companies have moved to using cloud services, especially for productivity. So, for example, Microsoft 365 or Google G Suite, or many other examples, Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera. Most organizations use these services, but they wisely have set them up so that they can use their corporate identity to be able to log on to those systems, be able to get single sign-on into these systems. And that's what hybrid identity architectures are all about. Taking your on-premises identity systems and then projecting those identities securely to where cloud services can use them. So that way your users can have just a single user ID and a single password that they use. They don't create separate passwords. They're more secure. It allows you to do things like multi-factor authentication and many, many of other advantages. So most organizations have hybrid identity architectures right now with an on-premises component and a cloud component. The reality is, though, Active Directory was designed 21 years ago, and there's just no way that those developers could have envisioned the environment that Active Directory is key to today. So as a result, there are significant vulnerabilities that you have to pay attention to. The third proposition is that Active Directory is central to hybrid identity. So I talked about an on-premises identity system and projecting it up into the cloud. Well, that on-premises identity system in 93% of the Fortune 1000 is Active Directory. If it's not their critical system, it is an important system to most organizations around the world. And what a success for Microsoft. 21 years after the product was released, which is forever in IT terms, it's still critical to how most businesses operate. So given those 3 things, identity is central to modern security. Hybrid is the dominant identity architecture, and Active Directory is central to hybrid identity. That means that Active Directory is central to modern security and needs to be looked at in that same way. So let me throw out a poll question here just to see where people are. So let's see if I can do this correctly here. So which of the following best describes your company's use of Active Directory? Let me put that out there. Is AD your primary identity store? Is it an important but not primary identity store? Is it one of just several that you use? Or is it your only one? Or do you not use Active Directory at all? We'll give you just a couple of minutes to put that out there and see what people have to say. Okay, I'm going to stop the polling. Got it. So what we found is about 30 to 40% say that Active Directory is their only identity store. We have another significant percentage, probably another 40% that says it's our most important, our primary identity store. So we have Active Directory confirming what our own numbers have shown is that Active Directory is of central importance to most organizations today. So one of the things that has changed in the environment is the way risk is perceived. The way we deal with risk, what we have thought of was important risk in the past, and the way life has changed. Historically, and to this day, of course, risk professionals, cybersecurity professionals, disaster recovery professionals use a risk matrix to help them figure out where to direct their focus and their dollars on mitigating risks. So this is a classic data center risk matrix, where the probability of a threat happening is the y-axis and the impact of it happening is the x-axis. So in the upper right-hand corner is the stuff that you want to spend money on, the sort of the red zone. And traditionally for a disaster recovery, for a data center rather, that's going to be around a power failure or natural disasters like tornadoes or hurricane. I live in Dallas-Fort Worth, and so we think more about tornadoes than we do about hurricanes. But these things have changed with the massive cyber attacks that we're seeing. And I won't spend much time on this slide because you'd have to be living under a rock to not recognize the danger that ransomware presents in the environment today. And just literally this week, Colonial Pipeline. And that is up the game, by the way, for ransomware attacks. So these kinds of infrastructure services that have been probed before, but they have not been attacked on this wide a scale. So this is a high risk game because number one, the victims are a critical infrastructure. Now at this Colonial falls into the category of critical infrastructure, but not life-threatening, but very, very important. More important than a regular business might be. So they're incented to recover their operations very, very quickly, which gives them incentive to pay the ransom very quickly. And as of this morning, we have learned that Colonial paid $5 million of ransom to get the decryption key to bring their pipelines back online. This also raises the stakes for the ransomware actor as well, though, because when they attack critical infrastructure, that puts the focus on law enforcement on them. So specifically for this threat actor, DarkSide, the FBI is looking at them, and DarkSide itself has actually, so DarkSide is actually this interesting concept called ransomware as a service. So they put up the ransomware toolkit, and then they have what they call affiliates, what a euphemism for attackers. They have affiliates that use their services to attack a target. And DarkSide has sort of been distancing itself a little bit from what its affiliates have done. Some affiliate that did this attack, they were like, no, it's not us. Well, they're squarely in the crosshairs of the FBI as a result of this. So, and you can see here, I have a whole bunch of other Texas ones that are in place, me being here in Texas. But we all know it's everywhere, and it's continuing to go up because it is so profitable. So in Q1 of this year, the average ransomware payment went up 43% compared to Q4. And you've got to admit, $5 million is that's a significant sum of money. So now the risk matrix looks like this, where you have denial of availability malware in the upper right-hand corner as the threat that needs to be mitigated. So for DarkSide and for what is actually about 90% of attacks, so lots of stuff is in the 90s here. So 97% of organizations surveyed say that AD is mission critical, and that it has the keys to the kingdom, the treasure map to the data, because Active Directory will tell you where everything is. That's part of its purpose. And also via group policy, the pathway to spread the malware. Well, turns out another thing in the 90% that I just learned the other day is Mandiant, the threat response company, says that about 90% of the attacks that they respond to have an Active Directory component in them because of what's called the Active Directory attack chain. They use Active Directory, the threat actors use Active Directory to go through the network and find these things. As I said, the treasure map to the data, the pathway to spread the malware. So what we have is a situation where Active Directory is at the core. It is the key component for the defenders. It's also the key component for the attackers. And it is the battleground, as you see here, 57% say an outage would have severe or catastrophic impact. It is the battleground for an organization against an attacker. And these companies that you see here listed, they may not have said explicitly that they had this in there, that they were attacked by Active Directory, but reading between the lines, you can tell that was the case. We like to position where these things go and where Active Directory fits in relation to the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that lays out where things fit. So you want to identify the risk to your environment. You want to protect yourself against that risk, protect your service against that risk. You need to detect the attack when it's happening. You need to respond to it. And then finally, you need to recover from it. So when you look at it in terms of disaster recovery, and specifically cyber first disaster recovery, that's where their Active Directory has a serious vulnerability to be aware of. So I'm going to throw up another little poll right here. And let's see. Once I figure out how to do it. Oh, that's interesting. It's showing up there. That's okay. Okay, let's launch the polling. So the polling in this question is, when is the last time you tested your Active Directory cyber disaster recovery processes? Did you have no plan? Have you had a plan recently created but not tested? What is the situation? Okay. And let's close that out. Okay, thank you. So what we see is, again, pretty parallel to what we've seen in other examples, where more than 50% of an organization don't have an Active Directory plan. They either have not put together a plan, or they have at all, or they have not tested it. In other words, in my experience, that's like, oh, let's look at the documentation and then hope that we don't have to use it. And we'll say, yeah, you know, we've had a look of it. And what our information shows is that indeed few can recover Active Directory quickly after a cyber attack. So this is a poll that we have done for our organization. 37% of our organizations don't even understand the fact that a forced recovery is a very, very difficult thing to do. They think it's just a simple backup and recovery like everything else. But in a cyber situation, it is not. And as I said, more than 50% of our survey responders have never tested their Active Directory disaster recovery process, or they don't even have a recovery process. So let me talk very briefly about the complexity of forced recovery. So a forced recovery is a very, very complicated process. This is a situation where you can't trust the operating system. You can't trust your domain controllers anymore because they have been encrypted by malware. And furthermore, the backups have either been encrypted or the backups have the malware sitting dormant on them, waiting to strike all over again. So you restore the domain controller from a traditional backup and recovery process, and you've just restored the malware. So at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning, these are the kind of questions you'd better have answers to before that malware strikes at 2:30 in the morning. I won't go into this, just to say that there's a lot of them, and then the actual process of having to recover a forest is got 28 different steps. If you have multiple domains, as you can see here on the left, if you have multiple domains, you have to do all of these steps for each domain. And some of these steps take a lot of time, and some of them cannot be rushed. Active Directory does it at its own sweet time, and it doesn't matter how excited you are, you can't speed it up. Over here, you can see that for every domain controller that you have to execute all of these. This is the process. It doesn't even talk about the people. Doing this recovery process is akin to getting an army on the road with provisions and operations in certain orders and all that. If you don't do this in the right way, you may have to start all over again in your recovery. And this is when the process is down entirely. What we at Semperis do is we focus on making this better. We focus on identity-driven cyber resilience and threat mitigation. We protect millions and millions of identities, from small law firms up to Fortune 1, against these attacks against your identity store and Active Directory. Specifically around the recovery aspect is the Active Directory Forest Recovery solution. And this is a fully automated, completely parallel recovery solution that is designed to be able to recover your Active Directory in a matter of minutes or hours versus days or weeks, and do it, as I said, in an automated process, and do it without recovering the malware, and allowing you options in your recovery to recover to different environments. And let me explain that briefly. So this is a comparison of Active Directory backups versus traditional backups done by Microsoft itself or by third-party providers. So pretty much everything else is a system state backup or a bare metal recovery. And that's what the API is, the volume snapshot. So these backups back up the operating system, and as part of the operating system, they also back up the hardware abstraction layer, the HAL. This has two important implications. Number one, the malware that's probably been sitting on your operating system for weeks or even months is getting backed up. So when you restore from these backups, you're restoring the malware. The second is that because the hardware abstraction layer is in these backups, the environment that you recover to is very, very limited, because that backup is configured to work with just this specific configuration. The ADFR backup, in comparison, just backs up Active Directory. We have a patented process that just backs up the Active Directory database, the log files, the registry hives, and a storage area that's called sysvol. We don't back up the operating system. so that, number one, we're not backing up the malware that's probably been sitting on the operating system. Number two, because we're not backing up the HAL, we have the ability to recover Active Directory to different environments than was backed up. We call it recover anywhere. So you can back it up on one server, and then you can recover it to a different server. So you can spin up a new virtual machine that you know has no malware on it because you've recovered it from a virtual machine template, and then point your backups at this new fresh virtual machine and recover your domain controller to it. That gives you the ability to rely on the fact that that DC is not going to have any malware on it. And also it gives you flexibility. If your on-premises environment has some degree of corruption, you can stand up new VMs in your on-premises virtualization environment. If you have a Hyper-V environment, you can stand it up to a VMware environment, or perhaps a cloud. You can create a bunch of virtual machines in Azure or in AWS and target your recovery up there and stand up Active Directory in there to get your company back and running again. It looks very simple. All it is 3 big buttons to do a domain controller restore, a partition restore, or a forced recovery. It's designed to be very simple at a time when everybody is pretty excited and you need to make as few choices as possible. So that's the recovery aspect of it. If we think about the ongoing operational cyber part of it, this is the other area of vulnerability for Active Directory. And as I've talked about it, Active Directory is the battleground. So we've seen the stuff, and we've seen SolarWinds attack happen. We've seen the Hafnium attack happens. What we've seen is that, and it's not quite as well known, is after the initial incursion, either from the SolarWinds supply chain attack or from the Hafnium Outlook Web Access backdoor, once in, the attackers used Active Directory as an attack path to do their reconnaissance, to find what they needed, and then to perform their attack. So during the attack, and before the attack rather, and during the attack, this is where we come into play with vulnerability assessments and looking after indicators of exposure and indicators of compromise. So Directory Services Protector is a continuously monitoring solution that, number one, monitors Active Directory for its security vulnerabilities. It does a continuous assessment of a list now of up to 69 different vulnerabilities in Active Directory, and it warns you of them, and it shows you how to fix them so you can make your AD more secure from what from the way the attackers might be looking at it. Furthermore, we have the ability to do tracking of everything that happens in Active Directory. In other words, every change that happens in Active Directory, we can see it. Not only can we see it, we can roll it back right away so that during an attack, we have visibility into any changes that are being made. Well, not just during an attack, but all of the time. But during an attack, you can monitor Active Directory for all changes and literally with the click of a button, just roll them back. This is sort of what it looks like. This is a rolling list of everything that's happening in Active Directory. And we get this information not from the security logs, which are sort of secondary. That's sort of secondary auditing of what's going on in the environment, but from the actual directory replication stream that the domain controllers themselves use. So the nuts and bolts of this display that you're seeing is all from actual Active Directory replication, all of these things, and they can't be interfered with. So we see things that show up in some places and don't show up in other places. So for example, we have here, this is an example, this is a footprint of what's called a Mimikatz DC shadow injection. This is an attack where an attacker inserts a backdoor into Active Directory, and specifically it's designed to not log anything into the event log. So this is the results of the event log. And you can see, for example, right here, this entry is blank. The reason it's blank is because the attack is designed to not write anything to the security event log. But because we're monitoring the actual replication stream, we see this change. And this is an actual injection of a privileged user's. This is actually a well-known SID of the domain administrators group that has been added to a regular user, and it's been added to their SID history attribute. In other words, the attacker has just taken this user and given them domain admin rights without appearing as a domain administrator. And what happens is simply by checking on a checkbox, you can roll it back. And here is the action of the rollback, where it has been removed by DSP. An attack that others don't even see, we are able to see it, alert on it, and give you the ability to remove it either manually or automatically. A simpler version of this, a one-time pass version of this, is a free tool that we have that's called Purple Knight. And it does a security assessment for Active Directory, a one-time pass for security assessment. Very simple, does not require any elevated rights in the domain. It doesn't even require any elevated rights in the on the workstation. And from that point, you can see your scorecard. You can see the vulnerabilities in your Active Directory. We don't see it. This stays entirely on your workstation, but this will show you the vulnerabilities that an attacker might see on your Active Directory and give you guidance on how to remediate those changes. So what I would say as a takeaway from this little session is to go off and look at your worst case Active Directory cyber disaster preparedness. Historically, most organizations have not adequately prepared their Active Directory for disaster recovery because they really haven't had to. But as you've seen, as I've demonstrated in the way the risk matrices work, and of course, everything we're hearing in the news today, a cyber attack is a different scenario than the people that designed Active Directory to be resilient against. And it is very vulnerable to these attacks. How can you do a full forest recovery? How can you reduce the risk of malware reinfection? What's the flexibility of your recovery scenarios? Can you recover to the cloud? Can you recover from one hypervisor platform to another hypervisor platform? And then, sort of an ongoing operational aspect of it, what's your ability to protect and remediate Active Directory? What are your indicators of exposure or indicators of compromise potentially? Can you review activity in your Active Directory to see everything that has changed? And you know that you're seeing all of it, not just what your logs tell you. And the ability to roll back these unauthorized changes to to help kick the attackers out of your environment. The shipping organization Maersk was hit by a cyber weapon from Russia, and it catastrophically destroyed their Active Directory. They just barely were able to get back, and it took them 9 days, and it cost them a horrific amount of money and all of their suppliers and everything associated with that. The CISO, the next CISO, not the CISO that was with Maersk at that time, said 9 days for an Active Directory recovery isn't good enough. You should aspire to 24 hours. If you can't, then you can't repair anything else. So this is a good takeaway from someone that has been through it. You don't want to go through that situation. So that's kind of a summary. I don't know if we have any, if I have any questions coming up, or if anyone wants to talk about it. This is sort of what I do, and I sort of enjoy talking about these things. But yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. That was fantastic. I know from my perspective, being neck deep in the identity space and working with our customers on assessments and strategic roadmaps, and recovery is certainly part of that. Active Directory is always, that number one, number two system we hit, right? If it's not number one, it's only followed by the authoritative source of identities coming from HR, right?
Right.
And so this is something we tackle quite often in looking at what are the strategies around maintaining and keeping your directory safe. You mentioned the Purple Knight tool in there. It's a great snapshot, right? Just to get a high level, where are things at, and then being able to set that strategy where to move forward with the other Semperis tools, or even just business processes you need to tackle. So it's fantastic.
I just learned that, so of the companies that have decided to give us scores back, they don't show us the details, which is great. We don't necessarily want the details, but the companies that have decided to tell us their scores, the average score that we've gotten back is about 63% out of 100. And the worst performing area is in Kerberos delegation, and it's around 43%.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a real eye opener. I mean, we've always known that Active Directory, due to the fact that it's old and there's configuration drift over many years, that it's probably going to be pretty weak. And I think running Purple Knight has been a real eye opener for a lot of companies. But it's good to get them to show them their vulnerabilities that they can then close up to make life a little bit harder for the inevitable attacker.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd say we'd see similar numbers, and being able to put numbers to some of those things really is eye-opening. So I completely agree with you there. We do have a couple questions that came in, so I'll keep an eye on the clock here and throw some of these your way. But the first one we have is, can Active Directory force recovery? And I'll just abbreviate that to ADFR just for simplicity. Can it store backups locally on the domain controllers? And if so, how many, right? I mean, if the connectivity is down, what options do you have?
Right. So by default, ADFR stores one backup copy on the domain controllers, and we sort of refer to it as a cache copy. And the reason we say that is because if you think of the scenario that you're really most concerned about, which is a cyber disaster scenario, let me back up. This sort of falls into two categories where you may be having to do recovery. The first is where you trust the operating system. That's sort of the historic, something's gone wrong with AD. The boogeyman schema change has gone wrong, or something that was really kind of never happened. But you know that the operating system that is the domain controller is okay. The other scenario is the cyber scenario. And by the way, that's what Active Directory is designed to really protect against. Where Active Directory is vulnerable is where you don't trust the operating system. So yes, you have a local copy on the domain controller that you can use for recovery processes. But if you've been hit by a malware attack, you don't trust the operating system, and so you're not going to necessarily keep that OS and the backup copy that's on it. So that's where you want to basically start all over for the DC, recover it from an ADFR backup onto something that's fresh that you trust, and of course the original backup will be gone, and pull it down and then do the recovery from there.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess kind of piggyback off of that, next question kind of goes hand in hand, but given that you do want to maybe recover to a brand new device, new IP address, kind of starting from scratch, are there any restrictions on taking that backup you have in that restore process, or what are limitations there?
They're actually quite few. What we have there are two. So we require that the new target, and it could be a virtual machine in IaaS, it could be a on-premises virtualization environment, or it could be a physical machine that you've had a guy come in and stick a CD in and rebuild it. Doesn't matter. It has to be the same major operating system version, Server 2019, 2016, 2012 R2, and it has to have the same disk layout. So if you've got C, D, E, F, you want to partition those volumes to match the same. And of course, there has to be enough room to recover the DIT and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Only having those two restrictions certainly gives you a lot of flexibility to get things up and running quickly, and not have to think too much about the architecture, given that you hit the basic points, you can be up and running.
Yeah, the way I like to say is, when you have people running around with their hair on fire, what you need is options. You don't need to, you can't get there from here. You need, well, that doesn't work. Well, let's do this. We have plan B, plan C, plan D.
Right. All right, great. Another question here, and I'll speak kind of personally from this too. You have customers that are just massive, right? Large global organizations. really spread out. Fortune 50, style organization. Is there a limit on the number of DCs that can be handled? I'm talking like 100+ DCs, these large networks.
Our largest deployment for ADFR has, we protect 600 domain controllers.
600, wow. Okay.
600, and we are in the process of deployment right now. For those of you that speak in terms of Active Directory database sizes, DIT sizes, we're in the process of deploying to a customer that has a 135 gig DIT.
Wow.
So big stuff. And Directory Services Protector, again, very, very large environments, 65, 70 gig DITs, that sort of thing. Those are, most enterprises, for a sense of scale, if you're not used to dealing in those terms, most enterprises, good size enterprises can have DITs that are 8 gig or less. So, I mean, I know you're familiar with it, Chris. I'm for the sake of anybody else that doesn't deal in DITs the way AD people or identity people do. Yeah. So yes, we scale up.
Yeah, that's impressive for sure. Last question I have here from the group, and then we'll kind of see if there's anyone else, any last minute questions. But you look at like the DSP rollback process. What does that look like in terms of procedural? Do you have to bring up a snapshot of the directory, or just kind of give us an overview of what that looks like?
Sure. The DSP rollback process is disarmingly simple. You look at it in the console. There's two ways you can do it. And by the way, this also includes group policy. So we can examine and do a comparison in group policy changes. If you see an unauthorized change, with a single click, you can roll a group policy back, whether it's an individual small policy down on an OU or whether it's the entire domain policy. You can roll it back with just a couple of clicks. But the rollback process is very simple. You see that change in Directory Services Protector, you check the checkbox in DSP, and you hit the rollback button. That's one process. That's the manual rollback. The other is where you configure what we call an audit notification. And the audit notification is you build a filter or you build an alert that says, let's look at this object in Active Directory, whether it's a group or an OU or an individual user. And you say, if there is a change to this object in any certain way, take this action. Send me an alert email, automatically roll it back. So the best known example is you can monitor the domain admins group in Active Directory, that object, and you look at the member attribute and you watch for an add operation. And if there's an add operation on the membership, on the attribute, which someone's tried to add a member to the domain admins group, you set off bells and whistles, you automatically roll it back. It goes into your SIEM system. All of that happens within about 30 seconds of when it actually occurs. So manual and automatic rollback. No snapshot mounting, no multiple tools, no none of that. It's bang, bang.
Yeah, I like how you started that. Disarmingly simple.
Having done a lot of identity demos, someone once said that, yeah, if you do a successful identity demo is really boring because it all just sort of happens with not a lot of friction. So that's what we're going for, is really boring and easy. As someone said, and someone talked about it being the easy button. I can't remember who originally said that. One of our customers said that.
Awesome. I don't think there are any other questions, and we're right up against our time here too. So thank you very much for your time today, Sean, and for everyone else joining us. I'll speak for myself. I certainly always appreciate kind of learning more about the space and living in it every day. It gives me more context to, what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. Right? I think they're good things to think about. And you look at some of these attacks, like your quote at the end there from Merce, like 9 days isn't going to cut it because nothing else can happen until AD is back up and running. So it's not just 9 days till you're out of the woods. That's just AD. Then you got to go downstream. So
yeah, that's precisely the thing. Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for your time. Thanks everyone for joining. We will make the recording available and send it out to the group, but hope everyone has a great afternoon, great weekend as we look into Friday tomorrow. So thanks again for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for spending the time.